I heard you, Linda, mentioning the issue of people who commit crimes. Their families are tremendously affected by all this, right? And their incarceration. And so this already becomes the breeding ground for the next generation being, if you pardon my expression, off kilter, in the sense they are disadvantaged already vis-a-vis life challenges, right?
Right.
So there is this incredible, horrendous, feedback loop, if you will. And I was wondering if there are any studies that would assess the cost to the society of that very phenomenon, because I suppose in economic terms you could somehow do this.
So, there's the $1 Million Block Project, which talks about the fact that there are blocks of neighborhoods where we've basically spent $1 million of money incarcerating those families, and that incarceration itself has lowered their ability to, and I have other slides I could show you about how much it lowers your ability to improve your life. You can't, and it's generational, right? But what gives me hope about the economic setting is that, when you intervene, especially in juvenile justice, if you intervene in schools, so for example, there was a great program in New Haven, which I think unfortunately has just shut down. I think they're doing other good things, but this particular one is gone, and it was called Children's Court. And so if you were involved in some kind of dispute or fracas at school, and you could go to this restorative justice program, and there were kids from the school who were basically serving as quote-unquote prosecutor and defense counsel and jurors. Now, I'm not sure the court metaphor was quite perfect, but the way they did it was quite perfect. So the prosecutor would basically describe what happened and sort of say, ask the person who was, had done this bad thing, why, what happened, why did you do it, what's going on. The defense counsel would sort of raise all the mitigating issues, and they would suggest a restorative, and then the jurors would suggest a restorative sanction. So you need to spend more time on your homework, you need to hang out with your dad more, you need to apologize to whoever it was that you hurt, whatever it was that happened. And then always one of the sanctions was, and next time you are serving on the jury. And I love that, because that's really talking about, making sure that the folks who are handing out the penalties are also the folks that are suffering the penalties. And that was, and I can't tell you how moving it was to watch those kids do that. And to have one kid from the jury box stand up and say to the kid who was, in the hot seat for the day, you know what, your dad is right here, you have a great relationship with your dad, you should really value that. And to hear that from a peer, it was just wow, it blew my mind. So I think that there's hope, and I think that especially the young people are so resilient and so powerful that if we just give them half a chance, they will turn things around.
That reminded, when I was in school, I was a peer mediator. And so I'm hearing this, I'm like, this sounds great, but why does it have to be a court?
Exactly.
Why does it have to be a court setup?
I agree with you.
It's mediation.
If we sort of, we have this idea that punitive incarceration is the only response to harm.
Right.
And I think that in itself is harmful, although it sounds like what the kids are doing is peer mediation.
That's what they were doing.
But it's in this court structure, which is reinforcing the norm and the generational effect of incarceration. And the photo that I did not put in the slide, but it's always a jarring one for me, is that this neighborhood in Brooklyn called Bed-Stuy, which is predominantly black, had a playground where the jungle gym was a jail. That was the jungle gym. That was chose. You know, it wasn't a castle. It wasn't a fire engine. They chose to make it a jail. And the parents, you know, there was outrage. It was taken down. But the idea that this cycle of incarceration starts before school. You know, we talk about school to prison, but it's really based on like what neighborhood are you born into. It starts from there. Injustice and suffering right now, and using whatever means we can to alleviate that is a worthwhile act. I don't think it's worthless to, you know, grant someone, you know, people who are granting clemency for, you know, nonviolent drug offenses. I'm happy that they're getting out. I'm happy for those individuals. That's their life. That's the, you know, the one life they have to live. It's not making a lasting change that's going to structurally change inequality in America. So I think it's both and. But it's certainly not enough. My criticism is when people think that all of these lawsuits is going to solve the problem. And that I don't agree with. I don't think the end result is we've fixed the criminal justice system. I think we have to recognize that it's working and make that the problem.
That's a complicated question, in part because I think that America is very, as Tocqueville said, we're a very constitutional-minded, legal-minded culture. So what needs to change is the culture, but part of the culture is this, you know, our constitution, equality, and our sort of idea that law is a central cultural place for these conflicts to play out. So I would say the lawsuits are necessary because that's where all of our conflicts always end up. All of our American conflicts always end up somehow in the courtroom. But it's not just the courtroom, it's the courtroom and it's the media and it's the public perception. And I'll give you I'll give you an example of why that's both good and bad. It's good, I think, in the sense that I think Americans want a government that is principled and that is based on some kind of rule of law. And I think that's a really positive aspect of that. The negative aspect is they think that that's all we need. And this Title VII case that's coming up is going to be a real test of that because, so Title VII was passed by Congress. It eliminates sex discrimination. It's supposed to eliminate sex discrimination, so it allows people to sue for sex discrimination in workplace. And so the question is, what is sex discrimination? And there's a bunch of court cases that have interpreted sex discrimination to include discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and to include discrimination on the basis of being trans. So the question before the Supreme Court right now is, well, do those decisions depart from the quote-unquote original meaning of the statute when Congress passed it? Or should we allow this phrase sexual discrimination to have these more expansive connotations based on some of these other cases and allow this statute to expand? Well, chances are the court is going to take, given its current makeup and given the current philosophy of the court, chances are the court is going to take the view that Title VII doesn't cover sexual orientation or trans rights. Because Congress, when it passed it in 1970, whatever, had no idea that this was even a thing. We can have a long conversation about why I think that's the wrong way to interpret statutes, but nonetheless, that's what's going to happen. But the public is going to take that as a constitutional case. They're going to take that as it's fine to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. And so that's the limitation of law, right? We take law to be morality. We need, instead of saying, oh, well, this was just a legal case. This wasn't about the morality of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. But the way that we can't talk about morality in public because that's, divisive. So we talk about law. But if we talk about law, then we expect law to track our morality. So it's going to be a really tough moment for us because we're not going to think of this case as, oh, this is just a statutory interpretation case and Congress can fix it tomorrow if it wants to. We're going to think of this as, oh, this is the morality of America now. And so I think that the relation between legal cases and sort of our cultural, deeper cultural issues about racism or about all kinds of moral questions for us are complicated.
Can I take that a little more and take it even to a worse place, I think? And excuse me for the egocentrism here, but when we do work in Israel in human rights, we have been accused, and I think rightly so, of collaborating with the powers that be. So it's not just that this is a legal culture, but that if you play into this legal culture, you're helping the bad guys.
Right.
First of all, you're providing a fig leaf for them.
Right.
You know, in Israel they say, oh yes, we have these human rights organizations. Wow, you know, we're really democratic. And second of all, this chimes in with what you said. A good friend of mine says he helps one by one. You know, he goes to court, to the high court, with this Palestinian and that Palestinian. He says, every little case that I can help, every person that I can get out of jail, every piece of land that I can salvage, I've helped someone. And the more radical postmodernists, let's call them, say, what are you doing? You're playing the game. So I'm wondering about this. Again, it's pragmatist, and it's water.
Inspiring water. Yeah, inspiring water.
Yeah, right.
Well, you know, this happened after during the original abolition movement, there were two views about the Constitution. One was the Constitution couldn't be salvaged, and you had to start all over, and you had to have a new constitutional convention, you had to get rid of the whole structure. And the other view was, no, you know, let's look at the Constitution through the lens of the Declaration of Independence and talk about the equality of all people from birth, or men at least. And you know, that conversation is a real conversation today.
I think it's the same conversation. I would say to the helping one person you're playing into the game, where I go because these types of issues have impacted me personally. It's what I say. No, I don't want this cousin to get clemency because this is playing into the game. No, no, I would be like, let him out. I want him home. And so that's my, you know, talking about treating people like family. That I don't think it's a waste to help one person at a time. It's just that when you approach it as this is the way to solve the problem, we're actually not going to solve the problem, because you'd help a lot more people if we did address the structural harm, the structural inequality that's built in. And I, you know, I just keep making the problem bigger and bigger, but I do think that this, I call it like an apostolic view of the founding fathers, is a problem. They got a lot of things wrong. So I don't know why we're trying to figure out their original intent. Like they were, you know, they weren't the brightest. They got a lot of harm. You know, I wasn't here at all. Why would I want to figure out what they wanted? I don't care what they wanted. You know, I think we can trouble that. But it's sort of, that's like, oh my God, why would you know, you say that, you know, you think and look at Copernic not standing for the national anthem, and then you want to start saying, well, the founding fathers, maybe we should just, let's forget about them and really let's start trying to figure out if they had anything right, and work from there. It's kind of like a non-starter with this conversation. But the one distinction I will say is that radical change is not inherently violent change. I think when people hear radical, they think like violent uprising. And revolution is different from radicalism, because revolution may not be radical. Revolution may just be changing who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor. But if you keep the same system, that is not a radical change, it's just switching the players. And that's not what I would advocate for at all.
Are there any more questions? Any more comments? Yes.
It's kind of specific, but you talked about how you worked in program design, and how like certain websites or things like, if you change the color of the person on the website, you might encourage more people to come in of that color. But when it comes to this, is more specific to like Quinnipiac. If you look at, I don't know if you're familiar with our website, but if you look at our website, like it seemed very diverse, and you see all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then they also like don't talk about the actual Quinnipiacs too on the website too. So like, how do you like take a look at the difference between our actual student population versus how we're marketing our student population? Like, how do you talk about that difference?
I mean, I think that's an excellent point, and that's what a lot of students who come to college and then they look around and they're like, well, this isn't what I thought it was, the student demographic was going to look like, have this complaint. And I think that the problem is that you're changing the picture to try to get more people to apply, as opposed to really looking at academia. We haven't really interrogated academia from when it first came up. It was built for elite white males. And what we've done over time is open the door to new people, but we have not structurally changed how our education system is delivered. You know, women are allowed in, but have we changed anything about, you know, the Socratic method was designed for men. So, you know, are we addressing who raises their hand first, who keeps their hand up the longest, how these discussions, you know, participation points, what does that look like? You know, does leaning in and looking at someone as they're talking count as participation, or is it only when you're making noise and taking up space? You know, we haven't really looked at how the education system is gendered, and so I think it is sort of going back to that original design, where if you try to think about how are we designing an education system for diversity, then you can take pictures of the campus and have diversity reflected in it, rather than doing it from the backwards in.
I just wanted to mention the subjects reparations and militarism. You know, the Jews of Europe, their dignity was an attempt to restore their dignity after centuries of oppression and the Holocaust, to give reparations. I would say the same thing for the long spell of slavery and racism in the United States for the black community. And but to talk about reparations in a very general sense is very difficult for people to take. But if, for example, if you understand that the United States had a policy, and it's just redlining, it had a policy which was denying mortgages. If you were a GI coming home, you got the mortgage. They went to the projects. They told all the whites there for the price of your rent, you can be in Levittown, but no, you can't go. Well, has anybody really figured out how much money was taken away from the black community? Could we have a pointed reparation in that way? And the other question is about militarism. The militarized school, the militarized mentality that invades us all, some more than others, how much of that is a drift from not only our wars, but from the scarred and traumatized soldiers coming back home again, over and over and over again. We've now lost, we lose, how many? The killer of soldiers, suicide. And they also bear scars that trouble the whole country when we, the veterans, don't kill ourselves.
As many Vietnam veterans committed suicide as were killed in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
About 59 since the 2000s, I remember.
Well, reparations, I think, is definitely something we need to talk about. And there are, I don't have the figures with me, but people have done estimates of exactly how much the African American community lost because of all of the various ways in which they were denied, and all of the lost labor during slavery, all of the lost labor during Jim Crow, all of the lost opportunities to have a stake in the land and to have a mortgage and to own land. And so there have been estimates, and it's trillions of dollars. And so how do you? I think the question isn't like how much do we owe, because I think we know how much we owe. The question is how do you pay it back? And I don't know the answer to that. I think that's a hard question. I'd love to hear what you all think about that.
But even that, apropos your change of mentality, I think 30 years ago, when people said reparations, you were considered crazy. Who's
Right.
And now it's become
Now it's a
a
conversation.
conversation.
Yeah,
So-
now it's a
And
conversation.
I always think of that in classes.
Yes. Things, you know, if you live long enough, things change.
Do you think reparations will actually help the problem of systemic racism in this country?
I think reparations is part of, if reparations was part of a larger transitional justice plan for actually addressing the mass atrocity of slavery in America, then yes. But transitional justice has, it's a study, it's a structure that has many components. And, you know, accountability, apology, reparations, and reparations is not, people think of it only as monetarily, but reparations shows up as monuments, it shows up in education systems, it shows up in film and media, like how we tell the story, a promise of non-repetition. What does that look like? And that would look like hundreds of laws changing. It would all be part of a larger plan, and then there can be reconciliation. And so those are like the 5 components of a transitional justice plan that you know other countries have done fairly well. There have been TRCs, Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, in the United States around various things, but as a nation, we've never really tried to do that for slavery. But yeah, so short answer, if it's part of a larger plan, yes. By itself, no, I think it's still going to be inadequate.
One sort of small historical point that I just learned, this is embarrassing that I just learned it, but you know, but during the Reconstruction, the sort of 7 years of Reconstruction Congress, when things were actually happening and the 14th and 15th Amendment were passed, Congress held hearings that were very much like the TRC hearings, where folks who had been injured by the Ku Klux Klan came forward and gave testimony. Members of the Ku Klux Klan gave testimony. There's, you know, in the law library, there's 600 pages of congressional testimony about some of the effects of, well, mostly the Ku Klux Klan stuff, but certainly about slavery. And we never talk about that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So, learn something new every day. All those history. Well, and plus, I also, how many of you have ever heard of the Colfax Massacre? Go look it up. We should be teaching the Colfax Massacre, at least in high school.
Is that what Nan?
Everybody knows what the Boston
I
Massacre
think I know
was,
that
right?
one, but I don't know it as Colfax.
Nan Woodruff wrote about that in the New York Times like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Oh, I didn't catch
think
that.
so.
I didn't catch that. Yeah, but I was reading. I was trying to do some historical research on this case called Crookshank that I've been teaching for years in various contexts, and then I was like, well, I wonder what the history was behind that case, and I was like, oh, that's crazy. So yeah, Colfax Massacre. Go look it up. It's good. Yeah. All those pieces of our history that just never got told. All those stories that got submerged.
Okay, I think